Hello and Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Musa with CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations, and it is an immense honor to be here with you all today at the beautiful Wesley United Methodist Church in honor and memory of the late Fred Korematsu. We're gathered here today to mark a grave injustice in our history, the violent removal, incarceration, and concentration of more than 120,000 Japanese Americans during World War II. We gather today in remembrance and in reflection on what it means when concentration camps are raised on American soil. But remembrance alone is not the point, because if all we do is remember as the same violence continues under a different name, then today becomes a ritual and not a warning. Fred Korematsu resisted because he understood something that we are being tested on time and time again. When fear governs, our rights collapse, selectively, quietly, and then all at once. Today in the United States, tens of thousands of people are locked inside ICE detention centers, modern-day concentration camps. Many are held for months or years without any hope of returning home. They are denied adequate medical care. They face endless court delays while their lives are suspended, literally hanging in the balance. Children are separated from their parents. Mothers are separated from their children. Families are violently torn apart, not by accident, but by explicit design. Because inside these facilities, people are put to work for pennies a day, coerced labor, slavery that keeps detention centers running while private corporations net profits to the tune of hundreds and billions of dollars. And this is not a failure of oversight. Unfortunately, this is the business model. Modern-day slavery is the business model, and it disproportionately and intentionally exploits Black and brown people. Black and brown immigrants are criminalized, detained, and disappeared into a void with little hope of return. And this is all too familiar to all of us, because these are the echoes of the same horrific rhetoric and actions that upheld Japanese internment during World War II. What happened to Fred Korematsu and Japanese Americans was not just a historical mistake. It was a legal decision that told the government that when hate and fear is loud enough, the Constitution can be silenced and people can be thrown into a void. Families lost their homes, their livelihoods, their dignity, and their souls. And decades later, the government apologized. But apologies do not undo the generational harm and trauma that has unfolded upon many years. And regret does not prevent history from repeating itself time and time again. That, I think, is the lesson of Fred Korematsu. Not that the system got it wrong once, but that the system has gotten it wrong many times before, and it will continue to get it wrong unless we stop it. And we are watching it get so much worse. In 2025 alone, at least 30 people died in ICE custody, the highest death toll since the agency's creation. An agency originally designed to discriminate, prosecute, and abuse innocent people based on their nationality and ethnicity. And many of the deaths in ICE custody were preventable. Human rights organizations have documented overcrowding, medical neglect, unsanitary conditions, prolonged solitary confinement, and the denial of basic hygiene. No due process, no law, and no respect. And the parallels to Japanese internment are not just rhetorical, they are structural. Back then, families were forced into overcrowded barracks behind barbed wire under armed militant fascistic surveillance. Now, people are being held in fortified facilities, warehouses, tent camps, cages monitored by cameras and guards. Back then, internees were forced to labor for little to no pay to maintain the camps. And now, detainees are being coerced into so-called work programs to keep these detention centers operating. It's the same language, the same machinery. We'll call it what it is, concentration camps. And we are also witnessing that system turn violently outward into our streets and our communities. Rumeysa Öztürk, a graduate student, was kidnapped for the crime of penning an op-ed opposing the genocide in Gaza. For that, she was surrounded by federal officers in broad daylight, violently taken thousands of miles away from her home, held for months, and denied basic medical care. ICE is acting as a rogue, masked gang roaming the streets, executing people in broad daylight. They shot and murdered legal observer Renee Good, and just this morning, they shot and murdered another observer in Minneapolis after he had been disarmed. The Trump administration and ICE are designating legal observers as domestic terrorists and using that as a pretext to enact, well, domestic terrorism and state violence. This is how civil liberties collapse. Not all at once, but selectively and eventually and comprehensively. First, against the most vulnerable. First, against those the state it believes can punish without consequence. Immigrants, like ourselves, are cast as invaders, as criminals, as threats, and once that narrative takes hold, anything becomes justifiable. Masked, fascist militants invade our cities. And this is not merely about drawing obvious historical comparisons. It is about recognizing a pattern where rights become conditional, due process becomes optional, and cruelty becomes policy. Fred Korematsu asked a question that haunts us even today. Who will the law protect, and who will it abandon when fear and hatred take over? And I want to be direct, especially as leaders and elected officials are present in this room. Commemoration and condemnation without action is complicity. We cannot claim to have learned the lesson while for-profit concentration camps are still standing, or by punishing people for opposing the worst genocide of our time and staying silent as it unfolds. History will not only judge us by our statements, it will judge us by what we allowed to continue when we knew better. Civil rights violations do not begin with dramatic headlines. They begin with legal exceptions, and they begin with silence, with the slow normalization of dehumanization, and then the inevitable darkness that follows. And today we must cast light into that darkness. Korematsu Day should not make us comfortable. It should make us uneasy, because the question is not whether future generations will look back and say this is wrong. They will. We all know this is wrong. But the question is, will we be able to say that we acted? With no apologies this time, but concrete action. If Fred Korematsu Day means anything, it must demand urgency. It must demand courage. And it must demand that we stop repeating history in real time, much like Fred Korematsu did. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Musa.